Andrew Lound's with me. Andrew, welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
It's 104 years since the Titanic sank, and we're still talking
Always.
about it.
Every year, plenty of things to talk about. It's just never going to go away, really, now. Titanic, as a subject, has gone beyond the normal realms of history. It's become very much part of human culture, not just in the West either. It has become a global cultural icon.
That was going to be my next question, that are we the only people who still bother about it? Clearly not.
No, I mean, the whole thing has just gone from strength to strength. At one time you had probably Western Europe and the United States, but now it's gone global into Asia and everywhere.
Just in the little time we've got just leading up to two longer chats I will have with you before we go to the break, is there more still to discover then? Are you telling me that there are still things we don't know about?
There are. I mean, we probably know more about this one ship and its one voyage than we do about the entire history of the original Queen Mary and her voyages. But yes, there is more to discover because it was a maiden voyage, and because of the maiden voyage, there was a lot we didn't know about the ship. Because had it sailed backwards and forwards for 3 or 4 years, we'd have got familiar with the vessel, we'd have known all the ins and outs. We don't. So there is a lot more to discover, and obviously if the logbook was ever discovered, that would give us another insight into what happened on that night.
I've just got to go back to what you were saying about the possibility that they might find the logbook. Where would it be? What sort of condition would it be in?
Well, it's a good question. In theory, it should have been put in a canvas bag and thrown into one of the lifeboats. That never happened, obviously. The bridge was destroyed while the ship was sinking, whether water got in. I mean, it shows you very well, oddly enough, in the film, the water smashes through the windows and it would have tore away the roof structure, which it did do. So the logbook, if it was kept close to there, probably in the office behind, may have got washed away and is somewhere in a debris field. Condition-wise, we've noticed that where paper has ink associated with it, either print or written ink, the ink is poisonous to microorganisms, so that it's generally survived quite well. So there is a chance there is something there, and hopefully they were making notes of all the decisions that were being taken while the situation was there, the exact time. Well, we know the time of collision, but at least we'd have a documentation. There has been some question as to whether or not the Titanic hit the iceberg or the iceberg hit the Titanic. That actually the Titanic turned into the berg, which was something that Lightoller had explained to a certain degree. But as there's no documentary evidence, you can't really take that at face value. So the book might actually suggest that. And the other issue with that is, of course, when Lightoller gave evidence at the courts of inquiry in American Britain, he was being heavily guided by his boss, Bruce Ismay. And he was a company man, so the chances were he wasn't necessarily going to reveal everything. He would only answer the question he was asked without volunteering.
Right. Talking of icebergs, there is more news on them very recently.
Yeah, an interesting one from Professor Big, what a superb name, talking about big icebergs at the University of Sheffield. And he's been doing some computer modelling of the iceberg, which is quite interesting. Surprisingly enough, there's been an awful lot of work done about the iceberg. I mean, I can remember a book coming out in the late 70s called The Voyage of the Iceberg, which looked at the iceberg itself. He's done some calculations to suggest how the iceberg formed, how big it was to collide with the Titanic, and he's come to a conclusion that the iceberg was about 75 million tonnes in mass.
That's big.
Yeah, when you take on a 46,000 tonne ship, there's only going to be one winner in that sort of a game. Yeah. That's an enormous iceberg, but the conditions for the icebergs that large getting into the ocean, it was very unusual and was probably unique for January 1912 for the first time in 15,000 years.
So you're saying that the iceberg that they hit was a one-off?
It was one of several very large icebergs which would not normally be that large in the ocean. Now, his work has said that the original snow which fell in Greenland, which fell onto the glacier, fell about 100,000 years ago. So the first building blocks of the iceberg that hit the Titanic started 100,000 years ago. And of course this is just layers and layers of snow of this glacier slowly then making its way down to the southwest coast of Greenland. And it's just a glacier then. The bits that fragment off from a glacier at the coast are called icebergs. And normally these are too large to get out of the local area because they have to melt a bit, break up a bit further, and then they can float out into the ocean. However, what's remarkable about January 1912 is that the moon and the sun were in just the right position, first position for 15,000 years, where you would have the maximum possible tides in the region. And because the tides were much higher, this could float away much larger icebergs than normal and larger quantities, which is why the North Atlantic in April 1912 was so filled with ice. And that was a rare event.
So there was no suggestion that they were off course or anything like that. They were going exactly where they should have been.
Yes, they were.
And there was also, they couldn't possibly have realised just how big this. Oh yes, there's icebergs, we know, because they would normally just sort of through and plough a furrow, wouldn't they?
No, they wouldn't. You always avoid an iceberg at all costs. Ice is a nightmare of a thing. You never ever tangle with an iceberg if you can help it. Always avoid it. They were taking the southerly route anyway to avoid icebergs. So icebergs do drift into the North Atlantic, normal practice. So they were taking the further south route. That was quite important. Then they received warnings that ice was being seen, and Captain Smith wisely then on Sunday went even further south. So they moved the ship even further south than was their normal course to avoid ice. Yet they still hit a berg, a very large one, which shows you the uniqueness of the situation at the time.
A theme park for Titanic in China?
In China.
I mean, come on, what is this all about?
Well,
apart from getting people to part with money and enjoy it?
It's about parting with money, and China and Japan, for that matter, are very good at taking ideas out of the West, revamping them and turning them into great successes without actually understanding the principle behind what's going on. And they've done this with this idea of a theme park based around the idea of Titanic.
So this is in China itself?
This is in China. So the idea is you go to this theme park and you can actually experience the impact of the iceberg on the ship and the process of the ship sinking. And the whole thing just seems, I have no idea what they're trying to achieve with this. It's got a very bizarre feel to it.
So they're actually building something. I mean, it's not, you don't go and sit in a room, it's not sort of computer generator or anything like that.
No, it's a true theme thing that they're trying to do. So that I assume what you're going to be looking at is almost, I hate to say use the word ride, but what you're looking at is get a large area for simulated it sinking. I suppose in some areas where the film Night to Remember was made, where they put a whole sound stage on hydraulic rams and lifts so they could actually make it move. This is the sort of thing I think they're looking at. And the idea is then you will experience the night to remember.
The night that you drowned.
I think it's, it just boggles, I don't know. I mean, 1,500 people died tragically on this people. Of those that survived, they were traumatised for the rest of their lives in many cases. And here we are simulating it. Are we going to get, is this going to be the beginnings of a whole new venture? You know, I'm dread to think what entrepreneurs are out there who might take this up. You know, Krakatoa. Let's have a volcano go up, you know, and everybody can sit there and get covered in pyroclastic flow. It's just kind of strange. Yeah. It is an example, though, how the Titanic has taken off around the world. And although I'm saying it's in bad taste, there'll be plenty of people to put their money on the table and go and do it. I know a person who won't be doing it, but there we go.
So while they are having this quote, experience quote, will there be an orchestra still playing?
Yeah, they're going to do the whole thing. This is the whole thing. Experience the sinking of the ship as a theme park concept. I just find the whole thing really bizarre and almost, it is actually sick. Very rarely do I use that term, but it really is. It is a very disturbing concept, really.
Do you have any idea how much people are going to pay for this?
I don't, and it would be interesting to find that out. Having said that, in the West, you can buy bouncy castles, the shape of the sinking Titanic. Right. And again, that really...
How close are they to the... I mean, are they nearly ready to open?
They're supposed to be opening it up this year at some point. So I think this summer season...
Well, one thing's for sure, there will be huge coverage around the world with it, but... as you say, sick, bizarre. I mean, I don't really know what the word is, but it's a bit odd. Now, talking of such things, there is going to be a Titanic 2.
Yes, there is.
Not quite the Chinese version and not quite the original. Tell me more.
Well, what we have an Australian entrepreneur who conceived the idea of rebuilding the Titanic. It's not the first time this has gone on. This has been going on now. Certainly the first idea I heard of a Titanic 2 being constructed goes back to the 1970s, would you believe?
Right.
Where Harland and Wolff actually, it was inquiry to Harland and Wolff, could you build us another one? And they said, yes, we could. But nothing ever came of it. But now, built with Chinese cooperation, because that's the cheapest way you can get it built, the Titanic is being rebuilt to modern building standards, because you couldn't rebuild the Titanic and let it float now because it wouldn't meet modern safety legislation. For instance, the lifeboats would be too high on the deck. So they have a set of lifeboats for everybody on board, I have to stress that, fitted in a recess inside the hull. It looks really good because it still keeps the lines of the ship quite nicely. So that's nicely done. But the boat deck is still rigged with original style lifeboats, which are there purely just to be seen. And you can walk into the bridge, the gymnasium. So that deck is perfectly kitted out as it would have been on the original ship. There is a second bridge, which is actually the real command bridge, fully equipped with all the latest navigation techniques. You can go through the ship itself. It's got modern power plant. So whether they're going, it would be nice if they could simulate the engine rooms to make them look right, like they've done on the SS Great Britain, for instance. But to all intents and purposes, physically, it looks absolutely right. And the idea is this will go on normal cruises. So the idea is you go on a cruise. The idea is no way at all to try and simulate anything but dubious about it.
No.
It is to live the age of the ship of that period, which I think is quite a nice idea, actually.
And for first class, that will be with some opulence, wouldn't it?
Yes, that's the idea, yes. And you will have the classes. But
So-
you will be, all passengers will be allowed to wander through the ship, of course. There'll be no sealing the ship up. So you can actually see the display areas.
So are they allowed to call it RMS Titanic?
It's going to be called Titanic 2.
Right.
It can't be called RMS. It's not a Royal Mail ship. It won't be carrying the Royal Mails, so the RMS disappears.
Right.
But there's no reason why they can't call it Titanic. It wasn't a name that was copyrighted or anything like that. And the term Titanic is a general term used anyway for meaning something that's very large or enormous. So there'd be no reasons why they couldn't do
So
that.
you can hop on. You'll be able to hop on this in Sydney or wherever. Go around the Australian coast up to
They'll be
Far East or
cruising
wherever.
it in that far area. Yes, it would be nice if they could bring it to Southampton.
Yes.
However, that would be an amazing sight to see it come and then cross to the United States. That would be a really thing to actually see. And of course, I think it's a really good idea. I mean, people will say, well, again, what's the difference between that and the China thing? There's a big difference.
Huge, isn't it? Yeah.
Bearing in mind her sister ship, the Olympic, there was a boom in sales to get people on the Olympic after the Titanic sank.
I can see Andrew is planning to go to Australia. Thanks so much for being with us, as ever.
Thank you.